Alrighty, welcome back everyone. It's episode 42 of the Information Revolution, which is very exciting for all of us. We can dub this one the Douglas Adams episode. Not sure
Hooray!
why last time I decided it was episode 2. Obviously a bit stuck in my ways. Anyway, my name is Michael Upton and I'm an information management consultant in Wellington, New Zealand.
My name's Judi Vernau. I'm an information architect based in Wellington, New Zealand.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I'm an information management consultant based in Adelaide in South Australia. And I think I get to open this one, don't I? Because it's my topic. One of the things that I thought we should talk about is managing records at scale. And it's just based on a sort of view that I've formed about how we think about records management, which is that we turn up in an organisation that's got 1,000 records to manage, and we have the practices that we do. And we turn up and they've got 10,000, we have the same practices. And we turn up and they've got 1 million and we have the same practices. And we turn up and they've got 1 billion and we have the same practices. It's like our practice is rolled out independent of scale. And I think that we're probably the only discipline where that is the case. You know, if you give people more and more and more stuff to do, they don't just turn up with more and more and more people, you know. And I keep coming back to this idea that, you know, it's sort of, you know, the bucket and spade versus the excavator. And I don't know why that just really appeals to me, but I keep feeling like, you know, we're almost, we kind of want to do things record by record. And we as a professional group, you know, we kind of want to do things record by record. And the problem is that we're turning up to these organizations that have got millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of records that we need to get through. And it's sort of like we've turned up to dig the foundations out on a very tall building and we're trying to do it with a bucket and spade. You know, we'll do it in 1,000 years or so, but at a level of cost that they will never pay, at a level of process intensity in terms of people time and everything else that they just won't do because it's too disruptive. And I feel like that's something that we need to talk about more, because if we keep turning up and trying to implement the same practices independent of the scale that we're at, then we're just eventually they will find, you know, these organizations will find people who can manage these things at the kind of scale that they're at. And, you know, we've got to talk about more than disposal, but, you know, I kind of, or sentencing, but, you know, I kind of look at it and I look at, you know, we might get somebody to turn up and do manual sentencing for us. And, you know, it might cost us $1,000 for the day and they might get through 1,000 files a day or something like that. So, you know, your cost of classification there is $1 per file. If we're looking at an organization that has 1 billion records, it's going to cost $1 billion to sentence all that stuff. We can't go to an organization and say that these records, you know, 95% plus of which you know you were never going to use again, because that's the information life cycle. You know, we go through that very active phase, and then after the first 2 years or so, you just don't touch the stuff again, but you want to hang on to it. We can't keep going to them and saying that it's going to cost $1 billion to sentence, you know, $1 per record to sentence that stuff that you're realistically never going to use again. That's just not something that we can keep doing if we want to be taken seriously in our organizations. And so I feel like we've got to develop these practices, which are very much, you know, it's how do we get to 1/10 of that, you know, and what are the mechanics of that? And how do we get to, you know, 1/100th of that, and 1,000th and 1/10,000th? And for me, at least, you know, I think a lot of it has to come down to really bringing risk management thinking into records management. Because what I keep seeing is that we're really looking at ourselves as a compliance discipline because there is legislation involved. But is that it doesn't make any sense whether you're a public organization, government, or a private organization to go and spend $1 billion sentencing your records when the biggest loss your organization will ever see, you know, from those records is $100,000 or $1 million. You know, the thing a sensible organization does in those cases is they say, well, we might have to give people some money to say sorry for whatever's happened, and we're going to park that money over here on our balance sheet and say that's what that money is for if we get this wrong, and then we're going to implement a practice that will let us do these records for $1 million instead of $1 billion. It's that kind of thinking. And I see that, I just see that as a pervasive pattern throughout information and records management. And I see it as one of the reasons why businesses aren't adopting our practices more rigorously and gaining a lot of those benefits they really will get from us. So I don't know, Michael, Judi, what do you think?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, good episode. That's the Douglas Adams episode done.
Yeah. Move on to the next topic now. No, I think absolutely. A pessimistic or fatalistic version would say that we've basically lost in terms of, like we cannot do the thing that I think we are sort of told we're supposed to do in terms of compliance at, at the kind of scale that information happens at the moment. And I think if I was going to extend your analogy about, digging holes for a building or whatever, it's like someone else is coming along and filling that hole in, like tipping in more sand as you're trying to dig, and the volumes are just going to go up and up and up. So it's not just that it'll take you 1,000 years because you don't have the right implement. You know, we know that the kind of scale of the problem is going to constantly increase on us, and so I always think about information management in terms of risk and value, and you know a sense of appraisal that's very macro, like, a sense of appraisal that's very broad brush and very like, okay, where are the biggest wins in terms of whatever it is we're trying to achieve with regards to managing information? Basically, which just sounds really cold and calculated and mechanistic or something, but
Yeah.
it's not that. It's about focus and about getting anything done, but
Yeah.
also getting the thing of value done, because we can't do all the things, like as much as we might like to, we can't. So what are the things that are worth doing, and what are the things that are most worth doing, so that you can, at least say, cool, we got those done, or we got sort of 80% of that done. I think before we've talked about the idea of kind of coming up with this beautiful sort of shrine to records management almost, these fantastic systems that are perfectly put together in every aspect, and then don't really get used, or don't translate to something that people want from us. And I think the reality is that the challenge of scale emphasizes the fact that that's not the right way to work anymore. I think that's really one of the key factors for how sort of untenable that approach has become. And an example I often run into is that, for instance, I tend to be pretty, I don't want to say fatalistic again, but if I was going to focus my efforts, I wouldn't try and fix an IT department when it comes to information management, just as one example, right? And in fact, I probably wouldn't focus really strongly on, for instance, a legal team or a finance team for different reasons. So at one end, you've got a set of sort of needs around information that I don't think line up all that well with records management. And I'm thinking about sort of, definitely don't want to talk about going feral after a recent episode.
Yes, yeah.
But with the IT shop, the focus is often just very transient stuff, or code repositories. Like, how are we managing work through systems in a way that's nothing to do with documents really, or little to do with documents. And so, while there's exceptions to that, and while there are things that I'd really want to help with, and while there's really important information in your technology area, that wouldn't be my point of focus. And then on the flip side, I'll use the examples of legal or finance. Like, those are information shops. Those are areas of the business that are typically really awesome with regards to the management of records and information. Because it's their lifeblood. And so, in terms of picking and choosing battles, it's kind of like, okay, well, um, those people probably won't get as much out of my time and effort, basically, as other areas of the business. But for those ones who are kind of almost like overachievers, is there something I get out of working with them? Because maybe they just want to be able to, I don't know, I just want them on side and they can help me to champion change in other ways. But in and of themselves, like I would accept that in any organization that I'm working in, that the standard of basically information management and use is quite different and it's quite lumpy in different parts of an organization. And I would expect that to be more so the bigger the organization. And so I would think that above a sort of very base kind of guardrail level, guardrail seems to be the word at the moment, I would leave a whole bit of the organization alone, if, if at a macro level I thought it wasn't the most important areas to focus. Yeah.
Yeah, and organisations obviously differ from
Yeah.
from each one to each one, because in some organisations certainly that I've worked in, they might be really big organisations, but a lot of people are doing the same thing. So that makes it a lot easier, of course. But you're right. I mean, the HR, finance, legal people, they tend to be excellent, in my experience, at managing because they know what the legislation is and they know what they've got to do. So, I mean, other than, you know, offering to help wherever, offering it to build, in my case, an information architecture that's going to help them to do their jobs as well as possible, you can pretty much leave them alone in terms of compliance to do the right thing because they understand that really well. And so what you're saying is good to focus on the other parts of the business where you can get the biggest, as it were, bang for your buck.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think what you're saying about risk and value is quite right. I mean, what is the risk if you're going to that part over there? How great is the risk if they're keeping things longer than they should do? Um, and if you go over there, how much of what they're doing is actually worth keeping over a longer period of time? Very important now, perhaps, but not important in 5 years, for example. I mean,
Yeah.
these are things that we've talked about a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, I always run into the so what factor. It's the, okay, we just decide that, all that stuff, we're just going to keep it for 20 years and we're just going to have a delete rule at 20 years. And then this stuff over here, which lasts longer than that, well, we're going to manage that stuff differently. I mean, I just don't see enough I just don't see much in the way of pragmatic thinking like that. I tend to see more granular rather than less granular. And I mean, IT shops are actually, in some ways, for me, they're a great example of one of the things I'm trying to get at, which is, that kind of the way practices transform as your scale increases. Because, if you've ever worked in a really small organization, you used to have one IT person and they'd kind of do everything. And they'd be rebuilding machines and they'd be
Yeah.
building servers and organizing email stuff. I mean, then you get to, sort of larger organizations and they become more like contract managers managing service providers. And then you get to even larger organizations and you start to get into, COBIT, control of business information technology objectives, I think is the name of the framework, and IT service management and, the IT infrastructure library,
Yeah,
ITIL,
the whole
which is all
ITIL
about,
stuff. Yeah,
but it's all about how to manage this stuff efficiently at an understood level of risk at real scale. And you can see shops that go from, you know 50 people to 50,000 people and rely on tech more and more and more intensively, and their practices transform as they go through. They introduce more automation, they introduce all kinds of things that are designed to deal with scale. They don't just say, well, we've got this pattern and we've got to do it, and then we're just going to, every time we need the next increment, we're just going to hire another body. And
yeah.
that's the kind of view that I sort of see with a lot of records practice. We don't have those well-defined transition points where we start to say, at this point, we are dealing with a qualitatively different thing because it's just got complex beyond our ability to get people to deal with it. So we're just going to do it like this. And it is, I mean, it's exactly what you keep coming back to, risk and value. And that's got to be what it is. It's got to be, at a scale of 1 million records, it's like this. At a scale of 1 billion, it's like this. We just let this stuff slide because we just can't police it. We're never going to be able to. It's too much volume.
And it's interesting, certainly in New Zealand, that the scales are getting larger, but actually the people involved in information management, certainly in government, are just getting fewer and fewer. So,
Which, I mean, if there was ever a signal that we expect you to do, we expect you to have practices that can deal with more scale. I mean,
yeah.
that's kind of it to me. I'm seeing, the same thing everywhere else. You guys know where I'm working at the moment, and it's, we have an extremely large organisation and an extremely small group of records people, and we're trying to build practices in that can handle the scale without hiring 10,000 people to do records management. Because that's just not going to happen.
So, to what extent would a complete new approach to retention and disposal schedules help with this? Would it indeed?
I think it's a great question.
Go there. Yeah.
Go on, Michael. You seem like you've got a point of view on that.
I have yeah. I would say that I mean, yeah, I find it hard not to just go into all the things that I think have gone wrong with how disposal authorities work and are applied. But one aspect, it might be sidestepping your question, Judy, but in implementation, there's an expectation in organisations I work in that you basically get business approval before you destroy anything in terms of disposal process. And so even if you believe that we've got the authority to dispose and the disposal action is destruction, you don't destroy without checking with someone. And there's really good reasons for that to do with, understanding business use and so on, understanding if there's other legal processes or reasons, that something shouldn't be chucked now. But that's so hard to scale. That's so difficult to say, all right, cool. In my lovely system, I'm essentially running a workflow that tells me, runs a report and says, okay, you've got 700,000 items in front of you right now, and you need to figure out who's going to have a look at those. And then you go and talk to those people, and they're like, what now? Like, what am I doing with a
I got
flat
stuff
list
to
of?
do, and my
Yeah,
manager's breathing down my neck saying you've got to get this stuff done, or it's going in your performance review, and you want me to review how many 100,000 lines in that?
Yeah.
I mean,
in a flat list, often in a flat list of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if we just give you this column so you can click on some things, will that help you? No, you
No.
know. Yeah. So I think one of the aspects there, and yeah, sorry, I have gone sideways from the disposal authority concept, but disposal in action, I do not know what to do about that because, I mean, I think it has to be another aspect of the risk related thing needs to be to say, like, can we get authority in advance from our glorious information asset owners at an appropriate level? Hey, these are the processes that we're going to run, and these are the checks that we will do. Let us go and do that now, rather than at the point of destruction or point of disposal going, we've sentenced things this way and we think we're going to chuck these things. And do you agree by looking at a line by line review? Because you can't. And it's
Um,
almost like you need a checklist that says, hey, I'm going to ask you these 5 questions and you say yes and no to them. And then you have pre agreed that what I can do next based on the answers to these 5 questions is nuke everything or, transfer it somewhere. Yeah, move it out of our custody.
I mean,
so the
it's
whole auto classification side of things that
Hmm.
all the vendors are pushing
Mm.
actually only gets you a tiny bit further, doesn't it? Because you've still got those hundreds of thousands that need to be looked at. I mean, they can all have a beautiful retention and disposal class on them,
but if
but they've
people don't trust
still got to be checked. Well, they've
it,
still
and
got
that's
to be
ultimately why we
checked.
throw checks in, right? Because we sit there saying we haven't built a system that's good enough that we don't have to do these 14 checks before we can think about, maybe thinking about destroying something.
I think when people sweat about technical limitations of a system, I'm half jokingly commenting on, having a flat list of 700,000 things you need to review for disposal. Like, the problem is the review for disposal. The problem is not the system. And it's something I see because I'm often dealing with 365 and people are angsting about compliance gaps there. Because, 365 out of the box is one of those systems that basically just serves stuff up with this one flat list. But it's like, what I would always encourage people to do is try and basically map it out, write out your disposal process that would be your dream in your organization, and then ask what it would take to do it. And the constraint normally is not a technical thing. It's not normally like, oh shit, excuse me. But at this point, I can't make a pretty enough dashboard for someone. I haven't got a relationship in the business with the right people to get this kind of authority and to get this trust and to have this confidence that we can do these things at scale based on risk, get pre-approvals or get, sort of, yeah, I'm just going to repeat myself, but hey, it's the people stuff. It's coming back to
It's
the people stuff,
absolutely, it's
you
risk
know?
perception. It's people's
Yeah,
perception of risk. I don't want to destroy that because disposal is final. So you're asking me to take a risk, and you've got to create real confidence in the process that you've got before I take that risk, before I'll accept it. And it is the people stuff. Maybe we need another episode on that because as an industry, I just feel like it's something where we're no good at. We look at these things as technical problems and problems where people just need to check,
True,
and
true.
they're not. They're risk perception. It's how people judge risk. And there's like I think we talked about it in the people stuff episode. Prospect theory. What was the finding out of that paper? Well, the state people find themselves in after they make the choice has to be at least 2.3 times better than the one they were in before they made the choice, or they just won't make the choice. And you're coming to them saying, I want you to
subversion.
make a decision about destroying these things now, which is final, and the saving is going to be what? It's a couple of terabytes on a file server that cost us $2.30 a year per terabyte. Like,
Yeah, that
where is
real
the?
hold. We'll take that. Yeah.
Yeah, it just. I think you just nailed it. I really do. And I keep coming back to what I keep coming back to as well is manufacturing analogies, because there's if you go and you look at the history of manufacturing, you run into Deming, who was sort of the father of quality management, and you look at what happened in America in the post-war years, and this is where the whole Japanese manufacturing revolution came from. And the basic, there were lots of differences, but one of them was that these plants in different parts of the world, they would there'd be a defect halfway down the line, and they would run this thing all the way to the end, and then they'd have a QA process at the end where they said that they'd go through it, and then what it actually meant was that they were losing about 10% of their production volume every time they did something because things had come off the line and they would have defects and couldn't be sold. And then, the remediation process for that inevitably cost 10 times more than fixing it earlier on the line. You go to Japanese manufacturing plants, and one of the lessons they learned was that, they had this idea that anyone can stop the line. Anyone can you spot a defect, pull the rope, we fix the defect, we fix the process that created the defect so that in the future there are no defects. And, that's where kind of Six Sigma and a whole bunch of these other things came from, which, Six Sigma is all about getting to, a level of defect that is 6 standard deviations from the mean, which ends up being, it's like 0.00243% or something like that. There you go. I'm off I can't remember the numbers, but it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the number. And maybe there's something there. If you were running a Six Sigma records program, where you built systems to have error rates that were less than Six Sigma. Maybe that's how you get there. I think the irony of that for me is that when I look at the organizations that I've worked with, the parts of the business where you can do that, it's all the structured data systems. Because the structured data systems have got they are the greatest record keeping systems in the history of mankind. They've got these very structured inputs that you can really constrain. And where can you run disposal super reliably? Well, in those systems, because you know what the thing is, and you know it reliably because you can't put anything else in there. And,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was interesting. I was reading
If
that.
you're designed for it, yes.
Yeah, I was reading that technical ISO 8344 technical guide again the other day. And, there's a line. I actually got it open on the other screen because somebody was asking me about it today. And, there's a line in there that says, in most cases, business systems are still not designed to capture records as records managers hoped by issuing ISO 16175. And, I kind of look at that and think that's a symptom of the problem. You go to like, let's go to Australian banks, which are some of the biggest banks in the world. None of them have built their core banking systems to ISO 16175. And, you'd kind of look at this standard and say, well, they're not good enough. They're also running they're also, the level of integrity is high enough to manage trillions of dollars of transactions every single day of the week. And they're not good enough for records management practice. I mean, that to me, if we want to end on a Douglas Adams note, it's kind of like there's something not right there. If by the time we've got a system that's good enough for records management, it has to be handling more than trillions of dollars of transactions every week. I think we've got to have a think
Totally.
about, you know,
Mm. Yeah. Judy, I did want to ask you, thinking about scale as it relates to information architecture,
Yeah.
any thoughts? Do you
Well,
think scale is an issue for it, or do you think IA can help with
I
scale?
think I think if you've done a good job, then it should be possible to scale up. Obviously, with all the caveats around what we've just been talking about, because no information architecture is ever going to be able to solve, well, as far as I can see, your retention and disposal problems. But just in terms of wider information management and scale, um, I think that uh, if you've got the right, as it were, conceptual framework, the right architecture, then that should logically support any number of information objects, with the proviso that, of course, if you're wanting people to be able to move around within an environment comfortably, then you don't want them to be encountering huge amounts of content in one place. You need to be able to filter that down so that it's much more comfortable to use. So you need to take account of how much content of whatever kind it is likely to be in one place, and then provide
Yeah.
the ways of slicing and dicing that. And just on the subject of scale also, um, if we think about controlled vocabularies, as of course I would do, um, there's another area where you really need to think about scale and how big do you want these vocabularies to be. If you're building the business glossary, for example, how big do you want that to be? Do you want it to be every term that might turn up in the organization, or do you want it to be just the ones that are easy for people to find and use? But whichever of those two is, you need to have determined that beforehand and to build your structure to support that, to make sure that um, your vocabulary is, as we say, hospitable, so that it's easy to add those other terms. If you've done your analysis and your domain modeling correctly, then it should be easy to add more in. But always thinking about that other aspect of information architecture, which is what it looks like to the users to make it comfortable.
Alrighty, nice one. We'll probably wrap that one up there. So here ends episode 42. As always, if anyone has some strong feelings about something we've said today, then we'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in being a guest, I should put that one out there. We haven't said that in a long while, but certainly we'd love to have other perspectives on here. We track down people ourselves, but we also love to hear from folks who would like to join in on the conversation. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
And if you feel like we made a lot of statements, or I made a lot of statements today, and you lost track of what the question was, deep thoughts on it. We'll see you in 7 billion years' time.
Brilliant. See ya.
See you.